What's going on, guys? Anox here, the creator of the Crucible handbook, and today we're going to be going over the art of team fighting. This video will cover how to team fight efficiently, as well as focusing on important techniques, skills, and game sense points that you should probably be paying attention to in game. This is my first video, and I'm super excited to be bringing to you all my philosophies on how to better yourselves in the Crucible. If you guys rock with the video, let me know by giving it a thumbs up or dropping a comment. I would love to hear what you guys have to think and like how the video was received. I also plan on making some playlists like mechanics, techniques, how to play certain game modes, and adding videos to those playlists to make it easier for you all to tap into whatever it is you feel like you need to work on. So without further ado, let's get it. So before we get into the meat and potatoes, I want to talk a little bit about the Crucible and my perspective of it, right? Competitive Destiny, in my opinion, is just like any other sport or esport in terms of like the tactics and methods used in order to succeed. So some examples of what I'm talking about are knowing when to engage in unison with your teammates. Another esport that is super big on that is League of Legends. In League of Legends, engaging with your teammates at the same time is super important. It could be the life or death moment in whether or not you win the team fight, and in whether or not that equals you, whether or not you winning or losing the game or not. By the way, shout outs to NRG, you guys did a great job. There's always next year, guys. I'm rooting for y'all. Another thing, relieving pressure from your teammates by doing your job, which is really just dealing damage. As long as you're dealing damage, your goal. Spacing the floor, basketball reference, which applies in the Crucible as well, because spacing your lanes is very important, which we will actually get into later. Comms, call-outs, and many other things. So I say all that to say this. Not everyone is going to be a LeBron or a Jason Tatum or a Luka Doncic, right? It's perfectly fine to be a Derek White or an Austin Reeves or Grant Williams or a Draymond Green. And what I mean by that is not everyone will top frag every game, and that's okay. Not everyone is the greatest slayer of all time and is going to drop 30 bombs on everybody's head. You know what I'm saying? Because everyone's play style is different, and that just means you need to find your niche or your role and be the best you can be in that role. Find out what you're best at and apply that as best as you can to your team. We'll revisit this later in the video as well, but there are different ways you can help your teammates and help win the game even if you aren't directly securing kills. That being said, let's get into the flow chart of how team fighting works. Team fighting is split into 3 phases: finding the fight, setting up, and engaging. Have you ever had one of those rounds where you didn't see a single person all round? This either means your teammates was going crazy or you were too slow to the fight. Finding the fight basically equates to your kill participation and wanting to make sure that percentage is as high as possible. Next is positioning. Setting up is about making sure you're in an advantageous and safe spot to prepare for your next engage. You don't want to clog lanes, and you also want to cover the most advantageous angles. Not all angles in Destiny 2, not all angles are created equal, and this is why angles are so important. Then there's the engage, which is just beginning the fight. If you wipe the other team or establish map control, then you win, and the whole process starts over again. Or you can lose the fight, and if you aren't dead, then you either trade or regroup, and the whole process starts over again. Now let's break down each team fighting step individually. First up, we have finding the fight, which is skill number 1. Finding the fight might not seem like that big of a deal, but it's extremely important because team fighting is all about dealing damage and outnumbering your opponent. There are 2 cardinal rules when it comes to dealing damage, and those 2 rules are: number 1, be present during the fight, and number 2, don't die. These 2 rules are the cardinal rules to dealing damage, because you can't deal damage if you aren't there, and you can't deal damage if you're dead. Finding the fight basically equates to your kill participation and wanting to make sure that percentage is as high as possible. Have you ever had one of those rounds where you was going crazy, basically took out the whole opposing team, or did massive damage to multiple opposing guardians, and then you died, and when you tabbed over to your teammates, your last surviving teammate was all the way in the back of your spawn, crouched with a scout rifle? If you know, you know, and I know you know. This is why finding the fight is so important. Coordinated teams are never too far away from each other, which equates to never being too far away from the fight. So how do you find the fight? Listen for shots. I almost instantly start sprinting when I hear shots and I'm not around. This is what you should look like as soon as you hear gunfire. Have you ever seen the movie A Quiet Place? That is also what you should look like as soon as you hear gunfire. As soon as you hear gunfire, if you aren't already there, you should be sprinting to your teammates in order to get in position to deal damage. Once you reach the fight, the first thing you should do is stop sprinting and find cover. Stop sprinting as soon as you see red on your radar. It's time to set up your positioning and start probing the battlefield for an angle and looking for holes in the defense. Next is the setup phase, which is where you will position yourself for the fight. The two main skills here that you want to focus on are your positioning and laning, also known as angling. Regarding positioning, making sure you're on the outside of the fight looking in is very important. One of my Mount Rushmore rules for me personally is I always make sure that the enemy is never behind me and at least in my peripheral vision. I try my best to make sure that no enemies are behind me to the point where I can't see them when I'm entering a fight. I always try and make sure I can see the entire battlefield. If you play Rumble, then you know T-boning happens a lot where you're in a fight and you get killed from a third player coming from another direction mid-gunfight. This is why flanking is such a strong technique to punch holes in the defense, because catching an opposing player off guard is one of the best ways to get a pick. Here are some examples of me actively adjusting my positioning mid-gunfight. As soon as I notice this guardian to my left, I instantly back up, see where my teammates are at, and then figure out the best angle for me to then continue the fight with my team.
That guy's tagged up there twice. That guy's tagged up there.
As soon as I notice this person on my left, I pan to the left real quick because I'm like, oh snap, somebody's on our left. I make sure I hug this wall. I keep this wall on my left as cover. Then I come back out. In this last clip, I hear an invis. Yep, I hear his invis hunter. Back up a little bit, then I see the marker on my radar. Back all the way up. My team is now, they're with me. They're still with me. Same lane, different angle. We're both looking at the curve here.
I'm backing up.
Keeping the opposing team in front of me, in my peripheral, staying with my team, and we end up with the team wipe.
Off the edge.
Enemy team has no reserves left. Finish.
Just keeping the opposing team in front of me. That's all it is. When it comes to laning and angles, you don't want to clog your lanes. Clogging your lanes can cause team wipes and blocked bullets from teammates standing in front of you, which in turn makes your laning less efficient. There are two different techniques that you can utilize to maximize your laning efficiency. Just like how in basketball there is the technique called spacing the floor, in Destiny there is spacing your lanes so there is breathing room to operate in a team fight. I believe that, generally speaking, up to 2 Guardians should be sharing the same exact lane, not all 3. Unless the lane is large enough for all 3 Guardians to move freely. Instead, use the same lane, different angle method. I call that the SLDA, same lane, different angle. This is a simple method that people just do subconsciously, but consciously knowing this method and actively controlling it can sharpen the skill and increase your team fighting ability. This technique just means you should be laning the same exact lane as your teammates, but just from a different angle. This is what SLDA looks like, same lane, different angle. For our first diagram, we have the correct way in which you should space your lanes using the same lane, different angle method. All 3 Guardians here have vision of the same lane from 3 different vantage points. Teams normally send 2 top, and you can do that too, but when I see 2 of my teammates go overlook, I normally go bottom, because that top lane is very narrow and can be blocked with a nade. So I don't like for 3 Guardians to all go to that top lane. But the most important part here is that all 3 of these Guardians have vision of lobby and overlook. So all 3 of these Guardians can see top and bottom, and they can defend against top and bottom. All 3 Guardians have vision of the same lane, but from 3 different angles. This makes it harder for the opposing team to play defense if they have to defend against 3 different vantage points. This next diagram is showing the wrong way in which you should space your lanes. This diagram is showing a Guardian going solo or lone wolf, and this normally results in a quick 2v3 because that lone wolf gets picked and then his teammates get mad at him because he didn't stick with the team. If that Guardian that went burrow or the Guardian that went bottom went overlook instead, then that would be okay because he would be close enough to still angle the same lane as his teammates that went terrace or outside. You always want to make sure that you are staying with your team and are within the same lane range when engaging and not splitting off and doing your own thing. We'll quickly look at 2 more maps to see how you can work on laning. In this example, we have Javelin. We can see how 3 Guardians can space out the main angle at Rocket where teams normally engage at the beginning of the round. Notice all 3 Guardians have space to operate while still being able to lane efficiently. Next, we have Dead Cliffs, where we can see how 3 Guardians can angle Ivy and trucks efficiently. Once again, notice how all 3 Guardians have their own pocket to operate in while still being able to see the same lane to lay down damage. This mentality of spacing your lanes and setting up same lane, different angle will greatly help increase your team's ability to lane and uphold a strong defense. The second technique that is great for team fighting is the crouch shooting technique, and I'm not talking about spamming crouch to win your 1v1s. I'm talking about team crouch shooting. True Vanguard covered this a long time ago, and I've been using it ever since, and this really can make laning a nightmare for your opponents. This also helps a ton with creating space in your lane to maximize your team's damage. Crouch shooting allows you to get your shots off as well as your teammates being able to get their shots off from the same angle as you because they are able to shoot over you. So you all don't have to worry about blocking each other's bullets. This technique is definitely a sleeper and I think it should be used a lot more. It's really a fire technique. Here are some examples.
He is out of second chances.
2 for 1.
One opponent. No more lives on your side.
Finally, we have the engage. This is when the fight starts. The main goal while engaging is to just do damage without dying. The without dying part is key because, once again, you can't do damage if you're dead. Something specific I want to mention here is doing 10, 20, 30, 40, 5 damage is okay as long as you stay alive, because then you can always return to the fight and do more. There are going to be times where you take a chunk of damage and have to exit the fight early, and that's okay as long as you stay alive. All the time I do as much damage as I possibly can before I have to dip out, and sometimes that's very little damage. If you're playing comp and you notice someone does the most or a lot of damage every round, that is a good indicator that that player has a high team fighting IQ. Now, damage can be fake damage, and by that I mean damage can be boosted by a whole bunch of different ways, such as shooting Titan barricades, shooting specters, using your super, shooting Titan bubbles, shooting Warlock turrets, and more. This is why I said, if you notice someone does a lot of damage every round, I believe damage is an indicator of how well a player understands team fighting and angles. And if all 3 players have this mentality, then wiping the opposing team becomes like second nature to a well-greased team. A Guardian has max like 200 health. This means, generally speaking, if everyone on your team does 200 damage, then you all should achieve a team wipe. That is something that should be kept in mind when heading into a fight. Just do as much damage as you possibly can and carry your load of dealing your amount of the damage. This method involves having trust in your teammates, but that also comes with having a well-greased team that knows how to angle and team fight. Once these techniques start to become second nature, then team fighting and your team fighting IQ will get better, making your fire team more deadly by you all clicking on all cylinders. Destiny is a team game and it's meant to be played that way. That's why Destiny pushes KDA and not just KD, because Bungie acknowledges how important assists are in their game and how assists are a general statistic in the Crucible. Here are some examples of me dealing as much damage as possible before I have to leave the fight.
Tiebreaker active. This is not the end.
Now, there are multiple techniques that can help increase your efficiency at dealing damage, and those techniques are using the same lane, different angle method, comms, aka communicating in callouts, crouch shooting, tickling your opponent, which basically just means by being
Victory
annoying
imminent.
and laying down bullets to draw aggro and take pressure off of your teammates, and knowing when to rotate and re-engage when you're getting angled, aka losing the fight. Those are 5 techniques that you can use to increase your team fighting IQ. Once the engage phase has ended, after you've either won or lost the fight, then the cycle starts all over again with finding the fight. Remember, there are multiple different ways to be successful in the Crucible. There are tons of different weapons, play styles, and methods that can be effective, and these are mine. I hope this video was helpful, and I appreciate the views and support, especially for my very first video. Dollar after dollar, holla at your guala. I'll catch y'all on the Crucible, man.
2 for 1.